Donald Trump is already trying to steal the 2026 election. Look, I know because I spent more than 30 years on the front line defending your right to vote. And I've litigated against Trump and his Republican cronies and beaten them over and over again. In the aftermath of the 2020 election, I helped lead the effort that defeated Trump and his allies more than 60 times. Now, in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how Trump and Republicans plan to undermine our free and fair elections in 2026. And at the end, I'm going to tell you what you can do to stop them. But before I do that, I need you to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay informed on how you can defend democracy. All right, here's what you need to know about what Donald Trump is up to. He wants to make it harder for you to vote and easier for him and his cronies to cheat. How does he make it harder for you to get a ballot? How does he make it harder for you to cast that ballot and have that vote counted? And how does he set up a structure that allows him and Republican election officials, his election denier crew, cheat you out of that vote? So the first thing I need everyone to buy into, okay? I need you to all take a deep breath and accept this as truth. Voting rules matter. And they matter not just in an abstract way, not just in a way of oh, it's good that we have fair voting rules, but they matter to the outcome of elections. If you allowed me to design a voting system where I could set the rules any way I wanted, it would dramatically increase the number of Democrats that are elected. Because, for example, I would draw districts for Congress that favored Democrats, right? Redistricting is just a form of election rules, right? Where you draw the maps, where you put the lines is just one of the many rules that people understand can impact the outcome of elections. But they're not the only rules that affect the outcome of elections. For example, you keep hearing that Donald Trump wants to target mail-in voting. Well, why does he want to target mail-in voting? Because more Democrats rely on mail-in voting than Republicans. So if you do away with mail-in voting, you decrease the number of Democrats who vote relative to the number of Republicans. Why does he go after drop boxes? Why does he want to require people to put stamps on their return envelopes to return their mail-in ballots? Because more Democrats use drop boxes. Because drop boxes are a vital lifeline to people in rural communities, for example, on Native American reservations. Because fewer young voters, fewer first-time voters have access to stamps. I mean, think about this in your own life right now. Think of someone who is 65 years old and ask yourself, do they have a roll of stamps if they open a drawer? And then ask yourself about someone who you know who's 25 and ask the same question. And I bet you that 65-year-old has stamps in their drawer. And the 25-year-old is like, I don't even know where to buy stamps. Like where does one get a stamp? So all of these rules have an outcome effect. Some of them are larger and some of them are smaller, but what you need to know is cumulatively, they can be the difference between who wins and who loses. The Republican Party is spending tens of millions of dollars to try to make it harder to vote. There is a right-wing network of organizations that are spending even more than that. And of course, the White House is now in the game because it is headed by Donald Trump. And the one thing that Donald Trump cares about is trying to make sure that he doesn't lose power by having Democrats win control of Congress in 2026. So Donald Trump is having all of these federal agencies, not just the executive orders he's issuing, not just the Department of Justice trying to get access to sensitive voter roll information and your personal information, but you have all of the government at his behest trying to make it harder for you to vote and easier for them to cheat. Now, there are three phases of the voting process, and we're going to go through all of them. There's voter registration, there's actually casting a ballot, and then there is vote counting and certification. But before I do, I want you to know that this is why I started Democracy Docket in 2020, to be a resource to you, to help keep you informed about what is happening to democracy and voting in court. As Trump continues to take over our elections, the work they do is more important now than ever before. So please, help support Democracy Docket's efforts and their team by signing up today at the link in the description below. Now, I promised you we were going to start with voter registration, and it is a critical part of the American voting experience. If you are not registered to vote in most states in this country, in fact, in nearly all states in this country, you cannot vote. There are some states that make voter registration easier, some states that make voter registration harder, some states you can register on election day, some states you can register really at any time. But almost every state has some type of rule that deals with who can register to vote and how. And what Donald Trump is already doing, what you see in the rhetoric from the Republican Party, what you see in the early executive orders from Donald Trump, is that he is trying to make it harder for people to register to vote, because if he makes it harder for them to register to vote, then they won't be able to vote at all. The best example that you keep reading about right now are so-called proof of citizenship requirements. Now, on their face, these sound perfectly reasonable. I mean, after all, we all agree that only U.S. citizens can vote in U.S. elections. Well, I've got news for you. Only U.S. citizens currently vote in U.S. elections. Like, there are already a myriad of safeguards to make sure that non-citizens don't vote in our elections. But because what Donald Trump is interested in is not actually preventing non-citizen voting, but rather preventing people from voting who may vote against him, he has concocted this theory, along with the Republicans, that in order to register to vote, you have to prove that you are a U.S. citizen. Now, I'm here to tell you there are really only two documents that will currently prove that you're a U.S. citizen. Number one, an original birth certificate. And number two, a U.S. passport. Now, with respect to an original birth certificate, most people don't actually have with them their original birth certificate. Like, they may have a copy, they may have a photocopy, they may have something that was emailed to them, but they don't necessarily have that original raised sealed copy or original of their birth certificate. You know, I tried this out as a test a couple of years ago. I actually called New York, which is where I was born, and said, hey, I'd like an original copy of my birth certificate that's certified. And you know what they told me? They told me that since the pandemic in 2020, right, 5 years ago, that their vital records offices have been understaffed and in some instances closed, and that it could take me 6 months to get that original birth certificate. And that's not unusual. I hear these stories everywhere I go around the country that, you know, the Republicans who say, well, just show your original birth certificate. It's not that easy. If you don't happen to have it and you need to get a new one, it's not always that simple. With respect to passports, I mean, let's be honest, most people don't have passports. And in particular, young voters tend not to have passports. Why? Because they haven't traveled abroad. And people don't get passports unless they have a reason to get it in the first instance, because they plan on traveling abroad. So when you put in place a requirement to prove citizenship, who are you mostly impacting? You're impacting first-time registrants, who tend to be more democratic. They also tend to be younger. They tend to be more transient. You are impacting college students. Why? Because college students are, again, less likely to have their original birth certificate with them, because they don't otherwise have a reason to have that birth certificate. Like, if they're in the job market already, maybe they have the birth certificate because they needed to show something when they began employment, but when they're in college, they didn't need it. But they're also impacting married women who changed their names when they became married. Why? Because the birth certificate name won't match the name on their other identification. So if you take the birth certificate name and you compare it to, for example, their driver's license, those won't necessarily be the same name if they changed it when they got married. So now you have to introduce yet another piece of documentation into the equation, which is a certified marriage license. And let me tell you, if you think it is hard to get a certified copy of your birth certificate, just try to get a certified marriage license and get the state that you now live in to recognize that that marriage license was, in fact, an original marriage license in a different state. This is set up by the Republicans for no reason other than to suppress voting rights. It is simply a convenient device to make it harder to vote so that you won't go through all these hoops. And even if you do, you may still be rejected. Now, let me say one other thing. Isn't it curious that they say it's really easy, just get a birth certificate, when, after all, it was Donald Trump who spread the lie that Barack Obama was not born in the United States, and that even after he produced a birth certificate from Hawaii, they said it was a forgery. Right? This is not going to end with you produce a birth certificate and they're going to be like, oh, that's okay, Mr. or Miss Democrat. We're going to accept that birth certificate. I promise you, they will find a reason to say that the birth certificate you produce, just like they did with Barack Obama, is in fact somehow not real, even though in that case, it was the state of Hawaii itself that was saying, yes, this is in fact the official document that we give people who want a certified birth certificate. What else is interesting about birth certificates? The reason why they are currently proof of citizenship is because everyone born in the United States is automatically a citizen. Well, what was the first thing that Donald Trump did when he came to office? Tried to do away with birthright citizenship. What does that mean? If he's successful, that will mean that birth certificates won't even be proof of citizenship. That's right, even proving you were born in the United States won't be enough. Donald Trump wants to set up a regime in which you can't prove that you are a US citizen if he doesn't want you to be able to. And that is why this is the first thing that we need to be paying attention to as we head towards 2026. The next thing that Donald Trump is trying to do to steal the 2026 election is to tamper with the voting process itself. Now, this is, unprecedented in American history. Like, we have never seen a president try to ban voting equipment, try to ban entire methods of voting, saying that he believes that no one should be able to vote by mail. I mean, this is the kind of totalitarian, authoritarian actions that we might expect in some third world dictatorship. It is not something that we expect from a US president. So what does he want to do? Number one, wants to ban vote by mail. Why does he want to ban vote by mail? As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, he wants to ban voting by mail because more Democrats vote by mail than Republicans. Because more Democratic controlled states like Colorado, Oregon, and Washington State rely on vote by mail. Because more other Democratic states like California have a large percentage of their population who vote by mail. Voting by mail to Republicans is the thing that allows Democrats to win. Now, to you and me, it's a way that we cast ballots securely. It's a way that we cast ballots from the comfort of our own home. It's the way we cast ballots without worrying that we would have to take time off from work. But to him, to Donald Trump, who wants to be an authoritarian, banning mail-in voting is the holy grail. And it's not just banning it in its entirety. There are other subtle changes that Donald Trump and the Republicans want to make to vote by mail that have a less dramatic, but a significant impact on who wins and loses elections. For example, he wants there to be slower mail service, right? I mean, he put DeJoy in charge of the postal service, and immediately we worried in the 2020 election that the mail delivery times were getting longer. Why? Because if mail delivery times get longer, then fewer people's ballots who cast them by mail in close proximity to election day will have those ballots received on time. What else does he want? He wants a rule that says that if a mail-in ballot is not received by election day, even if it was cast by the voter a week in advance, and there is a clear postmark on that ballot that shows this ballot was mailed well in advance of the election, if it comes in the day after the election, he wants that ballot thrown in the trash. He wants those ballots not to count. And he wants that so badly that not only is he talking about doing that through executive order, he has the Republican National Committee suing over that. And I have fought against him in case after case after case because it is not only wrong, but it is illegal to tell someone that their ballot winds up thrown out because the U.S. mail service was too slow in delivering it to the election office, even though the election office knows that ballot was cast by the voter in advance of election day. In fact, there's a case going to the U.S. Supreme Court. Right now, the Republican National Committee is litigating this case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to get the Supreme Court to bless this radical rule that would discard hundreds of thousands of otherwise lawful votes cast in states around this country. Now, the good news is you have lawyers like me and my law firm, and we are fighting them, and we are going to continue to, and I am very confident that at the end we will succeed. But it's not just when ballots are received. They want to make it harder to count ballots for so-called signature match issues. This is when they compare the signature on the return envelope with the signature they have on file. And if they don't match, they want to throw those ballots in the trash. Now, why do they want to do this? Because there is a higher rate of rejection for signatures among younger voters than older voters. There's actually a higher rate of rejection for signatures for women than men. So literally, if you were designing a system to benefit old white men, it would be the system that Republicans want. How bad is this? Let me give you a couple of statistics. From Florida, for example, if you cast your ballot by mail in Florida and you were 18 to 21, you had a 5.4% rate of rejection. That means approximately 1 out of every 20 ballots cast by someone under the age of 21 was thrown in the trash. If you were over the age of 65, that was a 0.6% chance, or 1 in 200. So the difference between young and old is 1 in 20 versus 1 in 200. And by the way, it's not just Republican states. In the state of Colorado, more than 2/3 of all the ballots rejected due to signature matching were voters under the age of 30. Now, why is that? It's because older voters tend to have registered using a physical pen and paper. So when they sign another physical piece of paper, the ballot envelope, of course they match. Younger voters more often signed electronically, on a tablet or using a mouse. So of course the signatures don't match. Also, younger voters tend to not prize a consistent signature in the same way older voters do. Because like when I came of age and I was 18 and 19, you had to sign a credit card receipt and they matched the signature on the credit card with the receipt. Like you'd give them the credit card and they'd look and they'd say, oh, that matches or doesn't match. We used to physically sign checks and the banks would compare the signature card with the checks. That just isn't true now. So that is just another example of what Donald Trump and the Republicans are trying to do, where they can't ban mail-in voting entirely, but they can rig these rules to have an outcome determinative effect on the election. And then there's early voting. We haven't heard the Republicans talk a lot about early voting so far, but I promise you Donald Trump and his Republican allies are working to undermine early voting everywhere they can. They are reducing the number of days of early voting. They are reducing the number of locations for people to vote early. Hell, when I represented Raphael Warnock, the U.S. Senator from Georgia, and by the way, there's an upcoming episode of me talking to Senator Warnock in which we discuss this, so make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit the bell so you get alerted when that episode becomes available. They tried to stop early voting in the runoff election on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Now, why would they do that? The special election had already been, the number of days for early voting had already been cut. The workers for the election offices were already open those days because they had to be open to prepare for the final days of voting. I'll tell you why they did. Because it turns out if you looked at who voted that day, they were overwhelmingly Black and they were overwhelmingly young. That's who was voting on that Saturday. And the Republicans didn't want it. Well, we went to court and we sued and we won. And as a result, 90,000 people had their right to vote protected, and they voted, and Raphael Warnock won by a little more than that margin. Of course, there's also what Donald Trump wants to do to Election Day voting. And, look, he wants there to be long lines among Democratic constituencies because people don't want to wait in line to vote. People think that our biggest problem when we head into Election Day is voter intimidation. And let me be clear, voter intimidation is a crime. We sue to prevent voter intimidation. It is terrible. Donald Trump is going to try to intimidate voters. But what Donald Trump really is trying to do is slow down the lines, right? Like if he puts ICE at the polls, a large number of people will just flip them off or they'll ignore them. But what ICE at the polls will do is cause a commotion. It'll cause a whole scene. They'll block off streets. They'll close parking lots. They will slow down the voting process. And let me tell you, having done this for 30 years, what Republicans are always trying to do is in areas in which you have large concentrations of Democratic voters, particularly African Americans, particularly college students, they are looking to slow down the voting process. They're not so much trying to intimidate people as just make the lines longer. And that is because most people have a limited amount of time that they are willing to wait in line. I mean, I'd ask each of you watching this video, how long would you wait in line to vote? Would you wait if you were told it was going to be an hour? Would you wait if it was told that it was going to be 2 hours? Would you wait if it was going to be 3 hours? And let me ask you this. If you waited 3 hours in line to vote one time, would you come back and vote the next time? No, and that's what they're counting on. That's how voter suppression works. It works by increasing the cost to people to voting. It works by telling people they voted by mail and their ballot was rejected. And when someone is told that their ballot was rejected last time, they are less likely to vote next time. It works because they wait in line for 3 hours. And when they wait in line one time for 3 hours, they don't vote the next time. When they hear a neighbor is waiting in line for 3 hours, they don't show up. And so a lot of this stuff about military at the polls, ICE at the polls, all of which I've said is going to happen. I've said We're going to see the military deployed in major US cities. We're going to have them on election day in 2026. But as much as anything else, what they are going to be doing is simply making the process of voting slower, more difficult, more cumbersome, a little more intimidating, and that can be the outcome determination in who wins and loses in elections. Let me give you a statistic from Georgia that I mentioned. If you were in the state of Georgia in the 2020 primary, and you were in one of the 6 metro counties of Atlanta, and you were in a precinct that was 90% or more Black voters, your average wait time to vote was 51 minutes. You know what it was if you were in the same 6 counties, same election, but you were in a precinct that was 90% or more white registered voters? It was 6 minutes. 51 minutes versus 6 minutes. Now you understand why the Republicans are cutting polling locations, why Republicans are, I am certain, going to deploy the military and ICE. It's not about intimidation. It's about taking 6 minutes to 51 minutes, taking 51 minutes to an hour and 51 minutes, taking an hour and 51 minutes to 2 hours, right? It is just about increasing the burden of voting. And that's what they think that they can succeed. Now, remember in 2021, I gave you data from 2020. I could give you data from 2024, but I gave you data from 2020 for a reason. Because what did Georgia do in the aftermath of that election in February and March of 2021? They banned the practice of handing out food and water to people waiting in line to vote. You all remember that, the headlines, they banned food and water to people waiting in line to vote. Well, why'd they do that? Well, I'll tell you what, they didn't do it for the white voters. I mean, if you're waiting in line 6 minutes to vote, you don't have time to eat. You don't need water, right? You're cruising in and out of the polls. The people who were getting the water were the people who were standing out in the sun in Atlanta because they were waiting in long lines that were created for the purpose of making them stand out in the sun in long lines. And so to cut off food and water is nothing other than to add insult and injury to further inconvenience a population that has already been targeted with inconvenience, to try to decrease the likelihood that they will vote in this election and, importantly, to vote in future elections. These are all cumulative ways of making it inconvenient for people to vote. Now, look, they can also do it by providing a shortage of locations and equipment and making, it easier for people to challenge voters and to engage in voter purges. I mean, we have an epidemic of voter purges in this country. I mean, Donald Trump and the Republican Party are trying to remove everyone they possibly can from the voter rolls because they know if they purge people from the voter rolls, they are less likely to vote because they think, well, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I'm ineligible. I don't want to get in trouble. And even if none of that is true, they're like, well, I'm not on the rolls now. I don't really feel like re-registering. So they don't vote. All of these things are cumulative. All of these things are aimed towards making it harder for you to vote and easier for Donald Trump to cheat. So we're going to talk about cheating, but before I do, I've got to ask you one more time to do me a favor. Number one, please leave a comment. I love reading the comments about what you all think about these videos. Is this useful? Is it not useful? Is there something else you wish I was talking about? So do me a favor right now, leave a comment in this, and also share this video. If you find that this information is useful, share it with a friend, because I promise you if it's useful to you, it'll be useful to them as well. And as always, please click the link below to make sure you are a Democracy Docket subscriber, either for free or for premium content. All right, vote counting and certification. Joseph Stalin infamously said, I consider it completely unimportant who will vote or how, but what is extraordinarily important is this: who will count the votes and how? All right, that's Donald Trump in a nutshell, right? Donald Trump is actually, at the end of the day, not interested in how people voted or what method they use for voting, right? What did he say in Georgia, right? He said, find me 11,000 votes. He didn't say where to find them. He didn't say how to find them. He didn't say add 11,000 votes or subtract 11,000. He doesn't care about that. He just cares what the vote totals are. And so he is very focused on vote counting and certification. He tried this in 2020, tried it in Georgia, tried it in Wisconsin, Tried it in Michigan, tried it in Arizona, tried it in Pennsylvania. I know, again, because I said at the introduction, I beat him and his legal team in court more than 60 times as they tried these efforts to undermine the results of free and fair elections. And he's going to try it again in 2026. How do I know? Because Republicans haven't stopped trying it since 2020. Like, the only non-negotiable platform or plank of Republicans today is to be an election denier. Like, you can be anti-tariff and still have a place in today's Republican Party. You can be pro-choice and still find your way to being the HHS secretary under Donald Trump. The only thing you can't be is someone who believes that the 2020 election was free and fair and that you want the 2026 and 2028 elections to be free and fair. It is the only non-negotiable item in Donald Trump's Republican Party. So, of course, they are going to again try to tamper with vote counting and vote certification, but you don't have to take my words for it. What did he recently post on social media? In the same social media post in which he said he wants to do away with mail-in voting, in the same social media post in which he said he wants to ban some kinds of voting equipment. And by the way, the voting equipment he's going to want to ban is the voting equipment that's used in blue cities. You can write that down in ink, that's the voting equipment he's talking about. You know, that's gotten a lot less attention because it's kind of like not clear what he's talking about. That's what he means. You go look up what voting equipment is used in the cities of a state versus the rural parts of the state, and that will tell you what kind of voting equipment he wants to ban. But in any event, what he said in that social media post, and I'm going to put this on the screen right here, is he said, remember, the states are merely an agent for the federal government in counting and tabulating the votes. They must do what the federal government, as represented by the President of the United States, tells them for the good of the country to do. Donald Trump is saying that when it comes to the counting and tabulation of votes in 2026, the states have to do what the President of the United States tells them to do. I mean, if there was a clear statement of Donald Trump's plan to rig the outcome of the 2026 election, I don't know what it is. And I have no idea why the legacy media never focuses on this portion of that social media post. It is almost like, well, it is like they are pulling their punches when it comes to Donald Trump. You know, they tell us to take him seriously, but not literally. I'm here to tell you, when it comes to vote counting, take him literally. He literally means that he gets to decide which votes count and which votes don't count. And this is the biggest threat that we face going into the 2026 election. Now, as a matter of law, as a matter of the U.S. Constitution, nothing he said here is true. The states are not agents of the federal government. The states are independent sovereigns. They have their own constitutional rights and their own constitutional responsibilities. They, in fact, do not have to do what the federal government says. In fact, the Constitution says that the time, place, and manner of federal elections is set by the states, not by the federal government. Now, it says that Congress, through appropriate legislation, can modify what the states do, but it does not mention the President of the United States at all. The President of the United States has no constitutional role in the counting or tabulation of votes. Federal law doesn't give him any role either. Federal law is clear that it is the role of the states and the role of the governors and the state election officials to certify election results to the federal government. The federal government is a recipient of that information. It is not a generator of that information. This was largely what the lead up to January 6, 2021 was about, right? Remember, the states had sent in their electoral college returns. Those returns had been certified by the governor of the states. They'd been signed by those governors. In most places, they had been countersigned by their secretaries of state, and those were in the hands of Congress. Why? To open them and to count them. That's it. There was no role for the federal government. There certainly was no role for the president until he instigated a violent insurrection in the nation's capital when he could not get his way in court. So what do I think he's going to try to do? I think Donald Trump is going to suggest that the vote counting was fraudulent, that illegal people cast ballots, that they used mail-in voting and all the mail-in ballots should be thrown out, and that the results that the states and the counties have come up with should be set aside. If this sounds fanciful to you, then you did not pay any attention to what his arguments were in the aftermath of the 2020 election. That is exactly what he argued after he lost the presidency in 2020. Now, what changed between then and now? Well, personnel. There was a famous meeting that's been reported on now over and over again that took place on December 16th, 2020, in which the White House counsel's office said they would resign if he went forward with this plan. The attorney general said he'd resign. The acting attorney general said they'd resign. Like basically the guardrails held in 2020 because the people around Donald Trump were refusing to go along with his illegal scheme. Does anyone really believe that the current White House staff would revolt? Does anyone believe that Pam Bondi would do anything other than cheer him on? Does anyone really think that Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, would do anything other than say, yes, sir, which ballots do you want us to seize first? No. That's why Donald Trump cares enormously who the FBI director is. It's why he put a sycophant in. It's why he put Pam Bondi, who was an election denier who tried to overturn the results of the election in 2020 for Donald Trump, put her in charge of the Department of Justice. It's why Stephen Miller is the most influential staffer in the White House today, because this is his plan going into the 2026 election. So let me just recap this briefly. He wants to make it harder for you to vote by making it harder for you to register. He wants to make it harder for you to vote by making it harder for you to cast ballots. He wants to make it easier for people to discard your ballots and have them not count. He wants to make it easier for states to purge your voters. He wants to make you wait in longer lines so that you will give up voting. He wants to have you intimidated. He wants all of that stuff to happen, but if that doesn't work, he wants the final say in what votes count and what votes don't count. But look, I'm here to tell you now is not the time to give up hope. Okay, Donald Trump wants you to believe that everything I just said is a fait accompli and there's nothing you can do about it. He wants you to think that he is all powerful and that no matter what we do, he will win out. And I'm here to tell you that is not true. Okay, it wasn't true in 2020. It wasn't true in 2022 when my law firm and we had to sue Cochise County, Arizona for refusing to certify the results of the election there. We had to sue counties in Pennsylvania because they were refusing to certify elections. And you know what? We won those lawsuits just like we won them in 2020. And we've been winning lawsuits ever since. So there are lawyers who are going to fight tooth and nail to make sure your right to vote is protected and to prevent these voter suppression laws from preventing you from being able to cast a ballot. And I promise you, just like you saw in North Carolina after the 2024 elections, when they tried to throw out 100,000 lawful ballots after the election was concluded as part of their vote counting and certification scheme. Just like that failed. It took months. The Republican Party litigated that case as hard and as aggressively as I've ever seen anyone litigate any election case. But in the end, they lost, and Allison Riggs took her seat on the state Supreme Court of North Carolina due to the hard work of lawyers at my firm and other law firms around the country. There are people who are going to fight. There are lawyers who are going to fight this and prevent this from happening. But you need to do your part as well. And part of you doing your part is making sure you are informed, you are ready, you are prepared, you are paying attention, you are shining a light every single time a state or local election board meets in your county or state. You are writing to your state legislators and your members of Congress telling them that you expect there will be free and fair elections, that it is their obligation and that you expect that they are going to do everything possible to protect your right to vote and your neighbors. We are creating these videos to create a community that you can be a part of that is educated, not scared and intimidated, but informed. And if we all do that, we can all work together, but it starts with you clicking the subscribe button. It is free. It is staring you right in the face, and also hit that bell so that you are alerted every time we post new content. It is important that you, in every way you can, to say that you insist that there are free and fair elections and that you are calling out the people who are engaged in intimidation and engaged in voter suppression. Each of us has a role. Mine may be to speak to you here on this YouTube channel. Yours may be to speak to your best friend or to share this video in a Facebook group. But all of us need to be publicizing this issue early and often and providing support for the election officials who want to do the right thing and being a watchdog for the election officials who are trying to do the wrong thing. But we're going to have elections. Even dictators love elections. Vladimir Putin loves elections. The question is whether they are free and they are fair. And yes, Donald Trump will be a big force trying to make them less so. But you and I, working together in a pro-democracy coalition, we can do our part to make sure that they are free and fair. Together, we will get through this. I will see you next time.